I was sitting on the back porch of my house in Savannah, watching the fog roll in off the marsh, when the woman standing at the bottom of my steps said, "You're the one who's been looking for her." I hadn't invited anyone up that evening. I hadn't spoken to a stranger in years about the daughter I lost. But before I could ask who she was, she climbed the first step, stopped just short of the porch light, and said, "Everything you want to know about the fire is in this bag." I asked her how she could possibly know what happened that night. She looked at me steady, no hesitation at all, and said, "Because I'm the baby you thought burned in that crib." Before I go any further, let me ask you something. If you've ever had someone you trusted with everything look you in the eye and lie, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button if you believe family should mean something. My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 68 years old, and for the last 32 years I have built the largest commercial fishing and shipping operation on the Georgia coast, starting with one leaking boat and a debt I could barely cover. I run docks in 3 states now. I've got men who answer to me before they answer to their own wives. I've sat across from bank presidents and congressmen and never once felt my hands shake. But there's one thing in this world that has never once stopped shaking my hands, and that's the memory of a burning nursery and a crib that was empty by the time the firemen pulled me out of the smoke. 31 years ago, my first wife Carolyn and I had a daughter named Grace. She was 7 months old. We lived in an old 2-story farmhouse outside of town, the kind of place with a wraparound porch and a nursery that faced the sunrise. One night in the dead of winter, the wiring in the walls gave out while we were sleeping, and by the time I woke up choking on smoke, half the second floor was already gone. I ran into that nursery with my bare hands on fire, and the crib was empty. Just ash and a melted mobile and a window standing wide open to the cold. The fire marshal said it was possible the flames had done it. Possible there was nothing left to find. Carolyn never believed that. She said in her heart Grace was alive somewhere, and she spent the rest of her life waiting by a phone that never rang the right way, until the waiting itself killed something in her. And she passed 11 years ago still holding a photograph of a baby who would have been a grown woman by then. I remarried 4 years after the fire, a good woman named Patricia, and we had a son together, Marshall, who is 34 now and runs the day-to-day at Hensley Maritime while I ease toward retirement. Patricia has been gone 6 years now too, cancer. And it's just been me and Marshall's wife Denise rattling around in a house too big for grieving people. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire, I still hire a private investigator to run down every lead that comes across the tip line. Every woman of the right age who thinks she might be adopted. Every scrap of dental record from 3 states over. Nothing has ever come of it. Not once in 31 years. That night on the porch, the rain hadn't started yet, but you could feel it coming. That thick, wet weight in the air that the coast gets before a storm rolls in off the Atlantic. I had a glass of bourbon in my hand and Grace's baby photograph, the only one that survived the fire, sitting on the little table beside my chair, same as it sits every single night. That's when I heard footsteps on my gravel drive, slow and deliberate, and a woman stepped into the porch light. She was maybe in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back tight, wearing a canvas coat that looked like it had seen a lot of weather. Her face was hard in a way that made me think of dock workers, not daughters. I opened my mouth to tell her this was private property, and that's when she said my life had been a lie for 31 years, and she intended to end it tonight. For one long moment I could not hear the crickets, could not hear the wind in the live oaks, could not hear anything at all except my own heart slamming against my ribs. I looked at her jaw, her eyes, searching for Carolyn in the shape of her mouth, searching for myself in the set of her shoulders. My hands started shaking around that bourbon glass. After 31 years of dead ends, of dental records that went nowhere, of women who lied for money and women who genuinely believed and were still wrong, was it possible that my daughter was standing at the bottom of my own porch steps? I set the glass down so hard it nearly cracked the table. I stood up, and I reached my hand toward her, wanting more than anything in this world to pull her into my arms and tell her I never once stopped looking, not for a single day. She stepped back before my hand ever reached her. Her eyes went flat and cold, like a door closing. "Don't touch me," she said. "I'm not here for a reunion, Walter. Not Daddy. Not even Mr. Hensley. Walter." Like I was a stranger she'd looked up in a phone book. That coldness hit me harder than the fire itself ever did. I pulled my hand back, and I asked her if she really was Grace, where in God's name she had been for 31 years, who had taken her, why she was looking at me like I was something to be scraped off her shoe. She didn't answer a single one of those questions. Instead, she reached into a canvas duffel bag at her feet and pulled out a thick folder held shut with a rubber band. "I know exactly what happened the night of that fire," she said. "I've got names, dates, bank records, and I'm not handing any of it over out of the goodness of my heart. I want $3 million, cash, before I say another word." I sat back down slow, like my knees had given out on their own. My own blood, or a woman claiming to be my own blood, standing in my yard shaking me down like I was a stranger on a dark street. 32 years of building an empire out of nothing does something to a man's instincts, and right then those instincts came roaring back up through the grief. I told her I wasn't a fool, that men and women had come out of the woodwork for 3 decades claiming to be grace, hoping for a payday off a grieving father. I told her I needed proof, a DNA test, something real, before a dime moved anywhere. She let out a short laugh, no humor in it at all, and reached back into that folder. She pulled out a single sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve and set it on the porch rail in front of me. "You think that fire was an accident?" she said. "Read it, Walter. Then tell me I'm lying." I put my glasses on with fingers that wouldn't stay still. It was a bank withdrawal slip, old, the paper gone soft and yellow at the edges. First National of Chatham County. The date at the top stopped my breath in my chest. It was the day before the fire, and the amount pulled in cash, no explanation on the slip at all, was $180,000. That kind of money didn't come out of a joint account back then without both our signatures, and I traced my eyes down to the bottom of that slip, down to the looping, careful signature I had watched sign Christmas cards and church bulletins and our marriage license. It was Carolyn's handwriting, my late wife. The woman who supposedly grieved that empty crib every single day for the rest of her natural life had pulled a small fortune out of our account 24 hours before our daughter disappeared into a fire that conveniently left no body behind. The porch seemed to tilt under me. I could hear my own pulse in my ears louder than the thunder that was finally starting to roll in off the water. 31 years I held that woman while she wept over an empty crib. 31 years I paid for grief counselors and mediums and psychics she swore could feel Grace's spirit still walking this earth. And the whole time, if this paper was real, she had known exactly where our daughter was, because she was the one who arranged for her to disappear. I asked the woman who she was, really, if not my Grace, and where she'd gotten a document like this. She said her name now was Raina, and that she'd been raised 2 states over by a woman named Colleen Frey, a woman who told her from the time she could talk that her real parents had died in a house fire and that Colleen had taken her in out of Christian charity. Raina said she only learned the truth 6 months ago, when Colleen was dying of liver failure in a hospice bed, and finally unburdened her conscience, telling her the whole arrangement, how a wealthy woman from the coast had paid her a small fortune to raise a baby quietly and never ask questions, how the arrangement had been brokered by a man Colleen only ever called the driver. I asked her why, if this was all true, she hadn't come to me the moment she found out, why she was here now demanding money instead of simply demanding the truth. Raina's face didn't soften 1 degree. "Because the truth doesn't pay rent, Walter," she said. "And because I want to know who profited off giving me away, and I have a feeling it's closer to your dinner table than you think." She stood up, told me I had 1 week to gather the money, and walked back down my drive into the dark before the rain finally broke loose. I sat alone on that porch through the whole storm, holding that withdrawal slip, and something inside me that had been broken and grieving for 3 decades simply stopped grieving. In its place came a stillness I hadn't felt since before the fire. A cold, clear stillness that reminded me I hadn't built 3 fishing fleets and a shipping empire by being a man anyone could push around twice. I did not sleep that night. By morning I had already called Otis Bragg, a retired federal investigator who'd done contract security work for my company for 15 years and who I trusted with things I wouldn't tell a priest. I told him everything: the withdrawal slip, Raina, Colleen Frey, the driver. Otis went quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then said the same 3 words I was already thinking: "Marshall's the driver." Not because he had proof yet, but because Marshall had been 14 years old and running errands for Carolyn's brother's trucking company the winter of that fire, and because Marshall was the only person left alive besides Carolyn who could have arranged for a baby to disappear quietly out of a burning house. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I did something I am not proud of, but something 32 years in boardrooms taught me is sometimes the only way to see a man's true face. I called Marshall and told him my heart had started acting up, that my doctor wanted me off work immediately, complete bed rest, no stress, maybe a procedure. I told him I needed to hand him full control of Hensley Maritime starting that same week. Made it sound like a promotion I'd been meaning to give him anyway, just accelerated by circumstance. I watched my son's face over video call very carefully as I said it, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes that had nothing to do with concern for his father's heart. It was hunger. The same hunger I used to see in competitors right before they made a mistake that cost them everything. I told Denise, my daughter-in-law, and Marshall both that I was taking the boat down to my cabin on St. Simon's Island for 2 weeks, completely off the grid, no calls, doctor's orders. Denise fussed over me the way a good daughter-in-law should, packed my bags herself, told me to rest, and let the family handle things. I let her. I hugged her at the door and thanked her for taking such good care of an old man, and the whole time I was thinking about a withdrawal slip signed by a dead woman and a driver who was 14 years old. The winter, my daughter vanished. I did not go to St. Simon's Island. I flew instead to Atlanta, where Otis had already rented out a secure office 3 floors below a law firm run by a man named Preston Vance, who used to prosecute organized crime before he went into private practice, and who owed me a favor from years back that he'd always known I would eventually collect. Preston looked at the withdrawal slip, looked at the folder of records Otis had already started pulling on Colleen Frey's finances, and told me flatly that what we were looking at wasn't a tragedy. It was a transaction. Somebody paid to make my daughter disappear, and somebody else had spent 31 years cashing in on the silence. Over the following days, working out of that secure office, Otis and his team did things that would never have held up if we'd needed a courtroom right away, but that gave me every answer I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. They traced 11 years of quiet payments, small enough to avoid notice, running from a shell account tied to Hensley Maritime straight into an account belonging to Colleen Frey, payments that had continued right up until the month she died. They pulled phone records showing Marshall had been calling Colleen Frey's hospice room 3 times a week in her final weeks, not out of kindness, but panic. And on the 4th night, sitting in that windowless office with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, I listened to an intercepted phone call between my son and my daughter-in-law that ended whatever was left of the man I thought I'd raised. Denise's voice came through the speaker first, tight with fear. "If Raina goes to your father with everything, Marshall, we lose it all. The company, the house, everything." And then Marshall, calm in a way that turned my stomach, said, "She won't. I've been paying her mother for 30 years to keep this buried, and I'll pay Raina the same way. Dad's old. Dad's tired. He just needs to believe his heart is bad enough to stay out of the way until this is finished." I sat in that chair and I felt something in my chest that was not a heart attack, but might as well have been, for how completely it emptied me out. My own son had known, not just about a cover-up, but had been the boy sent to hand a baby to a stranger in the dead of winter, had grown into a man who kept paying for that silence for 3 decades, and was now scheming to buy off the daughter he'd helped disappear so that he could keep an empire I had built with burned hands and 40 years of my life. I spent one more day gathering everything Preston Vance said we would need, not just to expose this to the family, but to put handcuffs on the right wrists by morning. I had Otis's people locate Raina, and when I finally sat across from her in a diner outside Macon, I told her the truth, that I believed every word she'd said, that I intended to give her more than money. I intended to give her justice, and I asked her to help me finish what her courage had started on my porch steps. 3 days later, I came home. I let Denise fuss over me at the door, let Marshall clap me on the shoulder and ask how the rest had done my blood pressure, and that evening I let them throw together a small family dinner to celebrate, as Marshall put it, getting the old man back on his feet. We sat at the long table in the dining room Carolyn used to keep so carefully, Denise pouring wine, Marshall at the head of the table looking every bit like a man who believed the throne was finally, permanently his. He stood up with his glass raised and made a toast to family, to loyalty, to everything I had built and everything he swore he would protect. Denise raised her glass right along with him, and for one moment, watching them both smile at me, I understood completely how a man could go 31 years without knowing the truth sitting at his own table. I did not raise my glass. I set both hands flat on the table and I told Marshall that was a beautiful toast, and that it was remarkable how easily a man could speak of loyalty while drinking wine his sister's disappearance had paid for. The color went out of his face instantly. I reached into my jacket and set the old withdrawal slip down on the white tablecloth, right in front of the empty chair where Carolyn used to sit, and I told them both that I knew everything. I knew about Colleen Frey. I knew about 30 years of quiet payments. I knew that a 14-year-old boy had once carried a baby out of a house before the fire ever started, and that the same boy, grown into a man, had spent 3 decades making sure his sister stayed lost, so that his inheritance never had to be shared. Denise's wine glass slipped out of her hand and shattered against her plate, red wine spreading across white linen like something out of a nightmare. Marshall came halfway out of his chair, and that's when the side door opened and Otis walked in with 2 of his men, and behind them, soaked from the rain and steadier than I had ever seen her, walked Raina, holding a photograph of herself as a baby that Colleen Frey had kept hidden for 31 years. Marshall looked at her, and for the first time in his life, I watched every ounce of confidence drain clean out of him. I played the recording right there at the table, Denise's voice trembling with fear, and Marshall's voice calm and cold, promising to buy his own sister's silence the same way he'd bought her mother's for 30 years. Denise sank to the floor, sobbing. Marshall tried to talk his way out of it, tried to remind me of the company, the market, everything I'd lose if this became public. And I told him the same thing I imagine every father in my position eventually has to say to a child who has disappointed him beyond forgiveness. I told him I didn't care anymore what happened to the company, because I had already sold my controlling shares to a competitor 2 weeks earlier, quietly, while he thought I was resting on an island. There was nothing left for him to inherit, nothing left to protect, nothing left at all except the truth. The police were already outside by then, and when they came through my front door, I did not look away. I watched them put handcuffs on my only son, watched Denise let out sobbing into the rain, watched 3 decades of grief finally have somewhere to land. Marshall was charged with obstruction, extortion, and conspiracy connected to my daughter's disappearance. He is awaiting trial now, and Preston tells me the evidence is strong enough that he will likely spend the rest of his working life behind bars, however many years that turns out to be. Denise took a plea deal and is cooperating, hoping for leniency she does not, in my opinion, deserve. Raina and I have spent the months since then learning how to be father and daughter again. Slowly, carefully, the way you'd approach a wound that's been left open far too long. She still calls me Walter more often than Dad, and I have made my peace with that, because trust isn't owed, it's earned back 1 season at a time. We visited the old farmhouse site together last month, what's left of the foundation grown over with weeds, and we stood there a long while without saying anything at all. I am 68 years old, and I have lost a wife, a son, and an empire I spent my whole life building. By every measure this town uses to judge a man's success, I have less now than I did the night that woman walked up my porch steps. But I sleep now. For the first time in 31 years, I sleep straight through the night without waking up, wondering where my daughter is, without wondering if she was cold, or afraid, or calling out for a father who never came. The truth cost me almost everything I had left to lose, and it was still the cheapest thing I have ever bought. With what remains of my fortune, I have started the Grace Hensley Fund, dedicated to helping families search for children lost to fires, disasters, and disappearances that official channels gave up on far too soon. We have already helped locate 6 children in our first 4 months, children whose parents had been told for years there was nothing left to find. Every time that phone rings with good news, I think about a nursery window standing open in the cold, and I think about how the people who hurt us the most rarely come from the outside at all. They come from the people already sitting at your table, the people you trusted simply because they shared your name. If this story has taught you anything tonight, let it be this. Love your family, but never let loyalty blind you to the truth staring you in the face. The people who truly love you will never need 31 years of silence to protect themselves. If you've ever had to face a hard truth about someone you trusted with everything, tell me about it in the comments below, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button if this story moved you, and I'll see you next time.